I'm Adam Jennings, and this is Awaiting Approval, a podcast about the messy human side of creative leadership. Today I'm joined by Kevin Parry, stop-motion animator and video wizard, creating scroll-stopping social media ads for the world's largest brand, for a relaxed, two-way conversation about his journey, the lessons he's learned, and what it takes to lead with creativity and honesty. Kevin, hi, welcome to the show.
Hey, Adam, thanks for having me. Thank you for that wonderful intro.
You're welcome. Just to get us started off, and so people can kind of get to know a little bit more about you, if we were doing this in person, if we were meeting today to record this, where would you suggest we meet and what would you order to drink?
I got to go coffee shop. Big into coffee, and I would order a cortado.
Fantastic. In that case, I will join you in a metaphorical one, and I will raise that to you to cheers you on in this recording and get straight on with it. When was the last time you used pen and paper?
This morning. I'm pretty big on notebooks and writing things down. I have dozens of notebooks kind of everywhere where I'm just jotting down and sketching things. And I come from an animation background where I learned pencil and paper. So everything I do is still planned out with storyboards and stick figures.
Love it. So it was like a really traditional, or what we think of as a really traditional route into animation for you, with kind of hand-drawn cell by cell or frame by frame?
Yeah, I might have been the last year or two where that was offered in college. So the program goes back to the 1960s where they were teaching obviously cell animation and paper and pencil. And I was in early 2000s and it was still pencil and paper. It was scanning in to then digitally composite. But yeah, everything scanned page by page. I think the year or two after I left, they went completely digital.
And so what have you noticed then, like as tech has changed, as the way you do things have changed, what's been held onto and what has now completely been lost into the flip book of time?
Yeah, it's a good question because I'm big into stop motion. It's a lot of what I do. And, stop motion technically was supposed to die off 30 years ago, but it's still going and it has this tactile appeal. I don't think, it's hard to say what should die off and what shouldn't. I think it's more the approach you take and how you tell the story with the medium you're using.
I'd love to, with that in mind, I'd love to go right back to your very first design or creative or animation role, like the very first role that you were hired to do something creative, to create an output in some way, shape, or form. And then if you could take us on a bullet point journey from there through the places that you've been and worked to where you are today.
Yeah, so my first job, I specialized in stop motion in college, and the first job I got was in CG as a CG animator. And that was just because the company saw my stop motion work and said, well, this guy can animate. We can teach him how to push a couple buttons. And the skills of bringing something to life transfer over mediums. And so kind of funny enough, yeah, my first day on my first job out of school, I was Googling, like, how do I use Maya? I've never used it before. But it worked out. Yeah, you learn that stuff really quickly. And then the animation skills are what you bring to the table. And from there, I worked very quickly into feature stop motion animation. I'm studied in Toronto and then only about a year working in CG on that job, and then went out to San Francisco to work on a stop motion Disney feature film, which very quickly got canceled about a year into production, where they scrapped, $60 million worth of work and all the footage went into the vault, which it was unfortunate, but a great opportunity to learn and a great opportunity to learn how the industry or projects can turn. You go into work one morning and then at lunch, management's telling you to pack your bags. So that was interesting lesson to learn early on. And from there, I rolled on to going to Portland at Laika to work on a number of animated stop motion feature films there. And I did that for about 5 years and slowly started doing the social media thing. I just couldn't help myself but make magical videos on social media. And I think that had to do with how slow stop motion is. You're doing 1 to 2 seconds of footage a day. So you're spending 2 to 3 years on a movie. So I needed something on the weekend to output my creativity. And I started growing audience online to the point where in 2018, I was starting to get brand deals with companies. and it was a bit too tough to juggle both the production work during the day and then the social media stuff on nights and weekends. And my wife and I just decided, okay, let's use this opportunity to go for it with the social media stuff and get back to Toronto closer to family. So 2018, I've been doing the social media stuff since then full time, and continues to this day.
Fantastic. That first time that something that you put out on social, because like there is that fascinating difference, like you say, between doing stop motion on a feature where it's 2 to 3 years before you see external feedback on what you're doing, and social, which is, you know, typically much, much quicker to get that feedback straight away. So I'd love to know the first time something went really big for you. Like, how did it feel to have suddenly that massive external feedback?
Yeah, you definitely get that dopamine rush of I think, yeah, and that it kind of coincided with having come out of school, and it was still a time when you'd get your film printed on some kind of VHS tape to mail out to film festivals. So that was kind of the standard at the time. So I had made a film in college, and yeah, having printed on tapes and stuff. And then I was like, why don't I just put this on YouTube? Why am I paying to put this in festivals? And so I put it up, and then I did. It was kind of my first push into how to market that kind of stuff. So I was lucky enough to showcase that film at an event in person with Tim Burton. I got to show it to him live on stage and sit with him and chat a bit. And I used that to my advantage. So I posted my film online and said, I got to show this to Tim Burton. I used that as like the marketing gimmick to then, well, people were like, oh, if Tim Burton wanted to see it, then I should see it. And I think the film kind of got some modest views for that time. That was a time when 1 million views was an impossible feat. So it was nowhere near that, but it was viral to me. And yeah, it was really cool to see how you could kind of take your own marketing and, uh, getting your film out there in your own hands.
That really resonates. I remember really early in my career when the internet first became a thing, or when the World Wide Web first became a thing. And at the time, I was creating very sort of basic websites for theatre production companies, but also, car dealerships and local newspapers and like any sort of client that I could have. But what struck me, especially coming from that theatrical background, was this is an opportunity to tell a story on a global scale. We'd only ever really had a certain geographic reach. And obviously the tech was not there then in order to keep up with a sort of rich, immersive storytelling experience. And you fast forward to now with the capabilities that we have. So for you, when you think about the next sort of magic video, where does that inspiration for the story come from? Because that's like when I look at everything that you produce, there's always a story right at the core of it all. And I think that's really important.
Yeah, I think you made a really good point there of the global reach. I think that's something I experienced as well. I grew up in a really small town in northern Ontario, so about 8 hours north of Toronto, up in the Great Lakes. So to post something and to have people all over the world seeing it, commenting on it, was a really incredible feeling. It's definitely eye opening. And to answer your question, developing stories, I think for me, I'm less of a narrative storyteller and probably more of like a technique storyteller where um a lot of the videos I make are I could kind of categorize them as technical experiments where I'm thinking, oh, it'd be really cool to try this visual effects technique or this stop motion thing. And part of the storytelling for me is how do I build almost like the behind the scenes into the actual clip so that when people are seeing it, they're sensing how it was made and kind of the human ingenuity of it all.
Love that. And it's like, I think those are the best magic tricks, right? Where you sit there and you go, I know this isn't real, and I feel that I should know how this is done, but I cannot figure it out. Like those are the ones that stick with you, right? When you've
Yeah.
watched the trick and afterwards you're going, I don't get it. I get how the first part works. I understand that, but that second bit, that bit that sort of subverted it all, I don't understand how that happened.
That makes me think of Yeah, that makes me think of any instance of a magician flying on stage. So, I was heavily inspired by David Copperfield as a kid, his TV specials, and watching his flying special. It's clearly wires. Well, or at least it's wires, and but you can't figure out the precise mechanics of it all. I think that's the fun of it. You get kind of a sense of it and a peek, but it's putting those last few pieces of the puzzle in. That's the fun part.
I think that's where those magicians, and I very much sort of uh, uh, apply that thought process to you, that persona to you with what you do. It's magical, and I mean that in a sort of sense of awe as you watch the clips that you make. I think those are the ones that are so successful are the ones that play along with that bit at first. Like, yeah, you're going to know how I've done this first bit, but then there is this twist that is the jaw-dropping moment. I remember it's a little dated as a reference, but in Ghostbusters, where Sigourney Weaver's character levitates above the bed, and you think, okay, wires, it's lifting her up, but then she turns 360 degrees, and you think, well, that can't be wires. Like, how did they do? And so those kind of moments, I think, are always the ones that are, yeah, that are the jaw droppers. When you think about all of those projects that you've worked on, the countless days, like you say, producing 2-3 seconds worth of work, but then over time, like the output of that as a whole, is there a moment in your career that you would go back to who you were at that time, but knowing what you know now? And if there was, what would you say to yourself?
That's a great question. I think I wouldn't. It's funny because there were a lot of days, a lot of weeks, a lot of months where you're as an animator when you're starting out, you're animating the most basic things. It's like you get assigned the shots that are basically just information shots where the camera pans over and something wiggles or like a garbage can tips over or something. And you think like, oh, I really want to do like the character shots and the big kind of more advanced things. And after the years of doing that, all you realize like the value of taking those baby steps throughout the years. And so, I wouldn't go back and tell myself, you're going to get to do the big advanced stuff eventually, or this is how to get there faster. Or I think I would just tell myself just to keep going, just trust the process. You're exactly where you need to be. And there's a lot of value to what you're currently working on.
I think that's so true for all creatives, isn't it? Like putting the time in to really get to know your craft and really hone your skills. Possibly the same for anything. I mean, a musician comes to mind, like in order to get world class at playing, I don't know, the oboe, like there is hours and hours and hours worth of practice that you have to put in. And it's the same for any kind of creative endeavor, I think. So it makes perfect sense. Having said that, like, and this might be too difficult to choose, but when you think of all of the things that you've done, is there a moment in work in your career that you're most proud of?
One that really stands out, I worked on a movie called Kubo and the Two Strings at Laika, and I was assigned because animators get assigned kind of a whole sequence basically, so they can mentally keep track of the performance. And I was assigned this big battle at the end, and there's this 12 or 14-second shot of the young Kubo running through a destroyed village, being chased by this giant snake monster. And Kubo's kind of like parkouring through and stumbling and fighting with his sword. And it was an incredibly complex shot that took weeks or months of planning. And I think it was a month of filming for this 12-second shot. And I think that stands out as probably the best stop motion I've ever done. And I just look fondly back on it from the planning process of me, out in the parking lot with a stick, like filming myself, acting the performance to then filming it in so many passes, but like compositing between this tiny model that has to look gigantic and the Kubo puppet. It was just a really cool kind of example of how all the departments work together and create this amazing sequence. I'm really proud of that shot.
I'm going to be heading straight to YouTube to check that out as soon as this is finished. You mentioned there about sort of collaboration between different departments. How important is that, or has that been for you?
On the feature film world, incredibly important. I think it's really evident with stop motion because really the difference between TV stop motion and feature film is not just the level of animation, but the rigging department that supports it. And the rigging is they develop all the mechanical stuff that allows you to do the animation. So that movie Kubo, there was a lot of characters sitting there talking and they're breathing very subtly, moving up and down. And to grab a puppet and to get those increments is nearly impossible. You just can't do it by hand. So the rigging department developed these things called jetpacks where there were thumb screws attached to the upper torso and hips. And you'd have these two twisty things in the back, and you'd reach behind and just twist them, and you couldn't see the change on screen. You had to just trust that you were doing it. And you do that and trust it for 3-4 seconds, then you start to see the puppet's breath come to life. So very slowly up and down. And that's all thanks to the rigging department. And basically whatever you wanted to do as an animator, you'd go to them and say, I'm dreaming of this mechanical device that does this, and they would just build it. On TV, you don't have that. You're just using like hot glue and popsicle sticks, basically. So the difference between feature is totally the department you never see because their work gets erased out of the movie.
Side note, hot glue and popsicle sticks, fantastic name for an autobiography. Just putting it out there.
That's true.
So when you, like, if you mentioned there the difference between sort of feature work and TV work, how solitary do you find, if at all, the social stuff and creating on your own? Like, how do you work through that? Because a lot of freelancers in say product design or branding or digital animation, they'll be there at home working remotely on their own, and that's tough. So how do you deal with that sort of isolation?
That's the biggest difference for sure. With the feature film or studio work, yeah, you're interacting with dozens of people every day. And yeah, jumping into this social media stuff, I'm now in a basement alone for 6, 7, 8 hours a day. And I don't mind it. I think I have a good personality type and I'm built for this kind of work. Even on the feature stuff, when you launched on a shot, you get in and you close the curtains, clip them off and say, put your red light on that I'm filming, and no one bothers you for days at a time. So there is still the isolation part, but you do get to do the coffee breaks and the lunch breaks and stuff. That's the part I miss a lot. Here it's just isolated, and the biggest implication is that my work is made in isolation. So I'll make a video and post it. Sometimes I miss things, and I should show it to more people and be like, "Oh, do you get it? Is it 100% clear? Is the effect landing?" And I probably should have some kind of group where I can show my work and get those checks first. But I don't. And I think it's just a part of everyone being busy. Everyone's kind of individually alone and too busy to look at stuff. But yeah, you just have to embrace it. And I think it kind of sharpens your self-criticism for what's working, what's not.
Which, leads me nicely into thinking of how do you deal or not with perfectionism? You mentioned about clips that go out and there's something you missed. Have you reached a point where you're kind of like, okay, that's fine? Or does it like really sort of niggle away and you think, I wish I could just go back and change that? Or depends on the project? Like, I'd love to know a bit more about that.
Yeah, I'm getting better at that. I think a handful of years ago, when I was first starting doing visual effects stuff, there was a lot of things I'd miss. Like I'd completely leave a mask layer rogue in the corner somewhere that shouldn't be turned on. And now I'm at a point where it's like I'm zoomed in 800%, moving individual pixels around, and I'm like, okay, no one's gonna catch this, especially when it's compressed on social media. And I think that a lot of the value is stepping away from the work. So I'll finish a video and I'll try to just not look at it for a few days and then come back fresh and see if it's working. So yeah, you can kind of get too microscopic with stuff. You miss things happening in the corners. So I think it's a good way to to kind of teach yourself when to step back and let things rest.
I guess if we sort of combine that with the other gems of wisdom that you're talking through, that idea of working on your own, but making sure you can get out and go and have coffee breaks and go and meet up with like-minded creatives, and then also share work in progress. Maybe that can be part of that meeting. Maybe that can be part of the breaking out. If you have a trusted group that you can then share what you're working on, because there are two things I think that are always true in terms of spotting something that isn't as it should be. One is time, that if you step away, like you say, when you come back, you'll see something glaringly obvious that you miss when you're really in the weeds. And the second thing is to have it printed physically, like a book or a packaging, because once it's actually gone to print, that's when you'll notice the typo or the error. It seems to always be the case. So I think there's something to that. And talking of that, actually, I'd love to know if when you go back over your career and you go back over everything you've made, was there a moment, I'm not going to say a mistake, but was there a moment where something didn't go quite as planned, but it actually gave you a real kind of aha moment, a real big learning?
There's a lot of little videos that I've made that have never seen the light of day. And that probably has to do more with my experimental approach where I'm trying new techniques and new things. And sometimes it just doesn't work out, especially the invisible editing stuff where I'm stitching two shots together. Sometimes things just don't line up and they never will. I have to give up. But I think probably that's easier to let go when it's just myself. I think better examples are in the feature production world where time and money is much more important. And there were shots that I'd animate where I'd get halfway through and just say, and it would just something was eating at me about the shot, and I would just have to like call in production and say, look, we got to scrap it. I'll figure out a way in a few months to make up these these days that I've wasted, but it's just not sitting right. And we have to let go of it. And I think that has to do more so with stop motion because in a way, stop motion is very, it's almost like a theatrical performance because you're launching on frame one and you have to just find your way through to the end of the shot. And sometimes it just goes off track and you can't wrangle it back. Yeah, so you definitely learn a lot more by calling in groups of, professionals and saying, look, I've wasted so much time and money, but I can't keep going. I have to start over. You have to have it's almost like you're disappointed with the failure, but you have to stand up and have the confidence to say, I need to redo this.
And typically, what's the response to that?
The production department isn't happy about it.
Hi. If what you're hearing is resonating with you where you are in your leadership journey right now, stay tuned until the end. I'll share details on how you can work directly with me to level up your creative leadership.
But a lot of the time they would call in the director to kind of either say, no, keep going, or to have your back with the restart, because it would ultimately be their call. And I think most of the time when an animator, it's pretty rare they call for a redo. An animator calls on themselves to start over. And typically the director would be like, okay, I see exactly where you're coming from. Yeah, it'd be better if we try this again.
And do you think that, that first project at Disney that you mentioned that got locked away into the vaults, never to be seen again, do you think that helped you in the following years when you did need to think, no, you know what, like this isn't working, I do need to restart this, I do need to stop this? Do you think that sort of experience stood you in good stead for that?
Yeah, because that was a really interesting experience where part of what wasn't working on the movie was that it was developing really slowly and going through rewrites constantly as we were making it. And because I was so new to the industry, I wasn't quite animating yet. I was just doing the tests to make sure things were ready for the stages. And one of the tasks they assigned me with was I would take the approved storyboards for a scene and they built me the whole set in cardboard with little cardboard stand-in puppets. And they would give me a lens kit and a camera, and I would go through the storyboards and do dummy versions of every shot, just a couple poses. But I'd be like, okay, we need this lens over here, and then this lens, and this is where the camera should go. No, we don't need to build this part of the set. The camera will have to get into the floor here. And that taught me a lot about the kind of the messiness of the process and the being able to finding problems was part of the process.
Yeah, I love that. It was like a mini school. I've heard this so often with creatives who they've gone to a school for their specific craft and then they've learned all over again when they're actually on the job. Not that there's anything wrong with the schools themselves. It's just there's so much more to cover when you actually get out there and start doing the work that it becomes a whole learning all over again.
Yeah, that was like a little mini directing school. I was really fortunate to have that opportunity.
When I asked about, the proudest sort of work achievement and I asked about learning some things that didn't quite go according to plan, I'd love to know what you're most proud of outside of work.
Well, I have to say my children are probably what immediately comes to mind. I have two young kids who are 4 and 1. Yeah, becoming a dad has changed my whole life for the better. So I'm really, really proud of being a dad.
Lovely answer. When you think about, we spoke at the beginning a little bit about sort of the change in the process and going from hand-drawn cell through to computers and thinking about what's happening now with Gen AI and that tech landscape changing so much. What are your thoughts on that? What's your vision for what's happening, and how do you suggest creatives work through this rapid change?
It's a big question. uh, I it's crazy what's happening, especially in the last few days with all the video advancements. Every other week is something crazy. As of yesterday, I think, fake humans are talking on video. And I saw on Google's AI channel, they had a whole channel of just yarn stop motion that's just being pumped out in real time or something. And it looks, scarily good, of little puppets made out of yarn walking around and performing. And part of me is like, oh, how am I supposed to compete with that? But then part of me is like, as I said, 30 years ago, stop motion was supposed to die out, but it's still going. And how to deal with it, I think it's just getting more and more important to tell the human side of the story and the process. So that's kind of what I've been leaning into on social media. Is with everything I make, I kind of make a secondary piece breaking down how I did it and telling that story of coming up with the idea and executing it. I think a lot of artists need to lean into that, telling that kind of human story.
Are you like, how do you feel about that move with tech and seeing AI produce these things? Like, there's a lot of talk about AI being technically competent, but still not a storyteller, still not having that kind of human emotion at the core of what it does. So, do you envisage a world or a future where you're still going to be hands-on with stop motion, or do you see it more as you're going to be there injecting the humanity into an output that was created by a machine?
I don't see myself using the Gen AI stuff at all. I have no ambition to do that. I just love the process so much. When I launch on a shot and I'm moving the stuff, that's when I'm so happy. So I can't see taking that away. And this kind of brings together a few things I was saying. When you're first starting out as an animator, those first few shots you're assigned, they're kind of the A to B shots where um, the camera cuts to a character and they're looking here and then they look here. And it's easier to animate, and it's just one of those shots that needs to move a point from A to B. And to me, that's what all the AI stuff feels like. There is no driving force behind the shots. There's no narrative. It's all those A to B shots. Every single shot in those outputs feels like this object now goes here, or this camera goes from here to here. And so I think that's part of the soullessness of it all.
Which I guess comes back to that point of, those that use it need to be the human pilot. They need to be the human center of the output that happens. What's your advice in general for those either wanting to get into the creative industries, maybe specifically stop motion, but also in the wider creative industries? And what's your advice for those that have been in it for a while, like many, many people have been in it for a while, but have been out of work for a while? What's your sort of take on that for them?
I mean, anyone getting into stop motion, I think you understand there are very limited studios and jobs in stop motion. So you definitely have to be aware of that. So that kind of merges both people starting out and people who have been out of work for a while. And that my whole thing is using social media to, both self promote and to get your work out into the world and to constantly be adapting. It was just a few years ago where I still treated social media like a portfolio, where I would this is the piece I made. Okay, next thing I make, here it is. Next thing I make, here it is. And then over the last few years, I've really leaned into turning it into a business and just finding ways to use the medium to promote myself, to tell the story of myself as an artist. And I've gotten traditional jobs like that where, in the traditional ad world, they need to do a clever VFX trick, and they've been like, oh, there's that guy who does the clever VFX tricks. Let's track him down to direct these commercials. So my advice is to tell the story of what you do and who you are versus just saying, oh, this is my work, this is my work, this is my work. So people can make those associations and hire you or, recommend you for jobs.
Would you say for you, those sort of secondary videos that you've done on like, this is how I've done this is how I made this work, are those the ones that are really telling the story of you and your skills and your experience?
Yeah, that's exactly it. And that's really the purpose, just to tell that story of what I do. It has nothing to do with getting views or likes or followers. It's just about establishing that story of what I love to do and what I'm good at, so that people, if it sticks in people's minds that I'm the person to hire sometime down the road, then fantastic.
What would be your ideal call to receive for someone asking you to work on?
Funny, I think I always had ambitions of directing stuff, and I still do, but I don't know. I always thought, oh, it would be great to direct a feature film, but having been in that world now where you see how much time and how much overtime and weekends and years of stuff, I don't think it would be animating or directing, a big feature film. Maybe that just has to do with where I'm at in life. I couldn't handle it with young children at home, but maybe down the line when they're a bit older. But I think right now, I think it'd be really cool to do some kind of like micro series on a streaming platform where I get like little, 30-second interstitials to create some magical effect or tell some story. Almost like little segments on Sesame Street or something like that.
I love that. And now, of course, you say that, and I now have the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 song going round and round, the pinball song. Like that's just the thing that comes up. But that's what a great opportunity, and to inject a little sort of moment of joy on a sort of episodic basis. I think I can absolutely see the fun in that. Following on from that, I would love to know, if you can, what is your, this could be a very personal answer, or it could be much wider. It's up to you to, how you'd like to interpret it. But what's your sort of definition for success within a creative endeavor?
I lean more within the actual work. I think clarity is a huge part of it. If something isn't clear and it's confusing, to me, it's not successful. That's step one. I think the second part of it would be evoking some kind of emotional response. So for my stuff, it's a sense of wonder. Can I get people to, what did I just see? How's that happening? Is that real? How's that editing? And then I think my definition of success for kind of more personal, I guess, I've transitioned from when I was younger. I was like, oh, you need to make money and all that kind of stuff, fame and fortune or whatever. And as I've gotten older and become a dad, I think it's just simply taking care of your family. If you can pay the bills, then fantastic.
I love that. And is there a freedom that comes with that sort of maturation from I have to have all the money and the big house and the big car, and into I just need to provide and get through and do a good job?
Yeah, I think 100% there's a freedom that comes with that, because the first instinct of fame and fortune is just more and more and more, and you can never, you're reaching a height that just keeps getting higher and higher versus just, simply having enough and being content. So I think there's definitely a piece to that.
I have one final question before we wrap up, and it's the same final question that I ask all guests. Are you, Kevin, still awaiting approval?
I'm getting closer. Yes. That makes me think of, there are these TikTok channels of people who interview elderly people, kind of reflecting back on their life. It's so many of them are 80, 90 years old, and they ask them kind of where they're at in life. And they often respond in some variation of, I think I'm just figuring it out. I think I've finally gotten a sense of things, and I can finally start, and I'm good to go now at 90 years old. So I think it's good to understand that, and to understand we're all just awaiting approval.
I love that. This has been a fantastic chat. Thank you. This is your opportunity. How can people get in touch with you, find out what's going on for you? What are the links, platforms, etc. they can find you?
Yeah, I've made a little one-pager, just kevinparry.tv/learn. And that has everything on there. It has all my socials, how to contact me, classes, courses, all that stuff.
Fantastic. Kevin, thank you so much for joining. It's been a pleasure chatting with you.
Likewise. Thanks, Adam.
Thanks for listening to Awaiting Approval. If you're a creative leader or stepping into a leadership position and want support that's honest, practical, and tailored to you, I'd love for you to come and join my Supercharged Creative Leaders Program. It's a 4-week course built around 8 pre-recorded modules, 4 live sessions with me and the rest of your cohort, a private Slack space for you to ask questions and go deeper together, plus ongoing access to my alumni community once you complete the course. Each cohort is capped at just 6 people, so you'll always get personal attention, real feedback, and space to grow. And if you want to tailor the journey further, you can book extra one-to-one sessions with me, and we can dig deeper into the challenges you're facing right now. I built this program based on everything I wish I'd known when I started leading creative teams. No fluff, no jargon, just the tools, frameworks, conversation, and clarity that will actually move you forward. Spots go quickly, so if this sounds like the right fit for you, go to growwithadamjennings.com to book your place on the next cohort. Previous attendees have gone on to win major pitches, land new roles, get promoted, and step into leadership with more clarity, confidence, and purpose. You can find out more and book your place on the next cohort at growwithadamjennings.com. I can't wait to start working with you. Awaiting Approval is a Cordial Fox production, hosted by Adam Jennings, produced by Adam Jennings and Jasmine Egner.